Hey everyone. So I wanted to just take some time to go over the lesson on APA format basics with you. I know APA format can seem very confusing. It's intimidating for a lot of students. And if you don't have just sort of a basic understanding of what APA is even all about, it can be very confusing to figure out how to format your paper properly so that it is adhering to the guidelines of APA format. So that's what I want to do in this lesson is really it is just an introduction and or maybe a refresher for some of you on APA format basics so that you can understand what we're really referring to when we say write a paper in APA format. Okay. Go ahead and take a look here. All right. So what you need to know about APA format. First thing is, what does APA stand for? It stands for the American Psychological Association. So you might be thinking to yourself, why am I required to use a format that is designed and used by the American Psychological Association? And the fact is, they designed this way of formatting for reasons that I will get into here in just a moment. And it turns out that what they designed, other fields out there, fields of study, were like, oh, this is a good way of formatting research papers. This is a good way of, citing things and whatnot. This would probably work for us too. So yes, it is designed by the American Psychological Association, but it is used in a wide variety of fields of study. Right? What we're talking about when we refer to APA format is two things. First, that there is a specific way of designing an essay, meaning how you do your page numbers, how you do your title page, how you use sections perhaps throughout the essay, how you do the references page, right? And then it also refers to how you treat your sources throughout the essay, how you cite your sources, okay? There are other formats that you can choose from when writing or that you might get assigned. The popular one, the other most popular one is MLA format, and that is designed by the Modern Language Association. And then there's also Chicago style. There are even others, but those two, MLA and Chicago, are the other two that are almost just as popular as APA. But MLA and Chicago are used by other fields of study that don't really have the same needs as the fields of study that use APA format. APA format is commonly used in social sciences, physical sciences, medical fields, and technical fields. And the biggest reason for that is really because of, well, one big reason is because of how the sources are cited in the essay. And you'll hear me say this again more than likely, but if you've ever been reading a research paper or an article and, they have clearly quoted a source or used information from a source, and then you see the parentheses right afterwards, and it will often have someone's last name and a comma and then a year. It's that year that really is important for APA format because all of those different fields that I just mentioned, social sciences, physical sciences, medical fields, technical fields, information about those fields of study is constantly changing. And so they really want to make sure that you're using current sources in your paper. So when you cite a source, And in the parentheses, you have that year of publication that lets your reader know, yes, this is an up-to-date source that we can trust is being used in the paper properly. All right. The first part of the parentheses, the name, we'll get to that later as well, but that also corresponds to your references page. But that is, the fact is APA format is just one of several formats that are commonly used, but APA format in particular lends itself to those types of fields of study. And all we're really talking about is how the essay is designed and how you cite your sources, the part that goes in the parentheses as you're reading and writing the essay. Don't be afraid of APA format. There are a lot of small, intricate details to APA format, but no one expects you to memorize all of it, right? Obviously, if you are someone who writes a lot of research papers, you start to use the format so often that some of it does commit to memory, because it's just familiarity, right? When I was in college, getting my undergraduate degree and my master's degree, I used MLA format because my degree is in English. So, English, Modern Language Association, we definitely use MLA. And there's really not a ton of difference between the two. But we don't put the year of publication in the parentheses, we put page numbers, because when you're writing a paper about Shakespeare, you're writing about Hamlet, and that was written, in the 1500s, and Shakespeare scholars have been publishing articles about his works for, a century or more. We don't necessarily care how old the source is, because someone who wrote a paper in 1930 about Hamlet, that information is still relevant to how we interpret Hamlet today. So in MLA, we don't care about the year. So we use page numbers instead. I started to get so familiar with using MLA format that especially by the time I was in graduate school, for sure, I never had to look up how to format anything. But in the beginning, you better believe that I was looking up every little thing. And that's sort of the trick, is having a general understanding of the format you're using and knowing where to go to find the answers to the questions you have. How do I cite this source? Oh, let me go to this handbook that I have that shows me how to, cite different types of sources in APA format. Or let me go to the Purdue Online Writing Lab and go to their APA section, and it will show me what I need in the parentheses to cite this particular source. Or I can go to apa.org and go to their section on APA format, and not only will it tell me how to cite that source, but it will tell me anything and everything else I need to know about APA format. So don't feel like you have to memorize how to do every little thing for APA format. You need a general understanding of it, and then you need resources you can refer to remind yourself how to create this reference entry, how to cite this source, how to format my title page, right? So I'm going to give you all of that in this week's lesson. We're going to give you a general understanding here, and then we're going to have another lesson on reference entries, and then we're going to have another lesson on citations, right? So a good bit of what this lesson is on the first element of APA format, which is really about the design of the essay, your page numbers, your title page, your section heading, that sort of thing. And then we will start looking more at the reference page in the next lesson on reference entries, and then we'll look at citations in the third lesson of this week. And I'm going to give you a ton of information in each PowerPoint, and that the PowerPoint can be your resource for figuring out, how do I do a reference entry for this type of source? How do I cite this source? But there are plenty of other resources out there for you, especially the ones that I had just mentioned, right? But you have it here as well. We're going to go through all of it, right? So before we get started on the design elements of APA format, I do want to clarify something. If you have learned about APA format in the past, especially if it was more than 2 or 3 years ago, you most likely learned elements from the 6th edition of the APA style guide. But of course, you know, they can't just leave well enough alone for whatever reason. Every so often they go back and make changes and publish a new edition. So what I am teaching you in all of these lessons is what is set forth in the newest 7th edition of the APA style guide, which came out in the fall of 2019. There aren't a lot of differences, right? Most of the differences are pretty small and subtle. But what we're going to be learning about in this week's lesson is from the newest 7th edition. So some instructors that you have, they may be using the 6th edition guidelines still. So you can find resources out there that show you how to format something according to the 6th edition guideline. And especially because in the 6th edition, every type of APA format was or document was considered the same. So if you were a student writing a research paper in APA format for one of your classes, you had the same exact guidelines as a professional in the field who is publishing in a peer-reviewed journal using APA format. And the 7th edition kind of does away with that. There are now different requirements for student submissions versus professional submissions that are intended for publication. So obviously, I'm going to teach you about the requirements for student submissions. But having said that, like I mentioned, you may have instructors who, maybe aren't keeping up with all of the changes in APA format. And so they might still expect your submission to match what a published author would use. I would just ask, if you get assigned any kind of research paper or research project, and the instructor, makes it clear that you need to be using APA format, I would just ask, do you want us to go by the old 6th edition guidelines, or can we go by the new 7th edition guidelines? Hopefully they will have an answer for you, and they will know the differences, or they may say either one is fine. But one of the big differences is that a student submission no longer requires an abstract. And that could be something that your instructor is still expecting from you, even though it's no longer required according to the 7th edition. So I would ask and clarify to make sure that, even though this is the new way to do it, perhaps there are some elements of the previous version that I'm still expected to use. And if that's the case, there are other resources, but the best place to go if you ever do need to figure out how to do something according to the 6th edition is to go to apa.org. Purdue Online Writing Lab is also pretty good, but, apa.org is straight from the source. It's their format, their gig. So you can always go there if you need information about the 6th edition, right? Okay. Now, like I said, in this lesson, we're going to focus mostly on the design elements of APA format, right? Because remember, the 2 big things about APA format are the design elements and then how you treat your sources, right? So design elements, these are things like your margins, the spacing, the font, the page numbers, the title page, headings and subheadings, and the references page. All right, so 7 main design elements for APA format that you need to be aware of. Again, you do not have to memorize every single one of these, but you need to be aware that there are specifications for the margin. There are specifications for the spacing, for the font, the page numbers, the title page, the headings and subheadings, and the references page. Just know I'm supposed to have a certain type of spacing throughout my essay. I don't quite remember what it was, but I know it's something specific. And then you can either come back to this PowerPoint, go to one of those credible resources online, and remind yourself, okay, that's right. That's what the spacing is supposed to be. I know I'm supposed to have specific information on my title page. Pretty sure I remember each element that I need, but I'm not sure of the order. I can't, I don't have the order memorized. Okay, come back to this, take a look. Go to one of the websites, take a look, right? Don't have to memorize them. Just know that there are specifications. And then you can go from there. But we are going to talk about each one of these. Okay, so we're going to talk about margins, spacing, and font on this slide. Margins, 1-inch margins on all sides. And you can set that up in the page formatting in Microsoft Word, and I would imagine pretty much any other program that you're using to type your document. The default is probably set at 1 inch. That's pretty standard across the board. And you should be able to tell as you're typing, like if the words are coming way farther left than they normally do, that's an indication that your left margin isn't set at 1 inch. So you've got 1 inch at the top, along both sides, and along the bottom, 1 inch. Spacing, the entire document should be double spaced. So from the title page all the way through the references page, from start to finish, the entire thing needs to be double spaced. I'm going to take 1 second here to show you something real quick. For those of you who aren't quite sure how to double space a document. Obviously, I can only show you in Microsoft Word, but it should be somewhat similar in other programs as well. So I am here on the Home tab up here on my toolbar, right? The main toolbar in Word. I'm on the home page. And then I come down to this thicker toolbar, and I come over to this block right here, this section that says paragraph. And then this is where you can, up here, you can, create a bullet list, create a numbered list, create an outline. This is where you get your alignment where it needs to be. Align left is where, the words are going to come back over here to the left margin every time you go to a new line. Center, right? That's what this is right here, the title page, that'll be centered. You can even do align right. I don't really know why anyone would, but you can. You can do what's called block or justify, where, like you can see down here, when we get to here, the word muscle, and the next word is relaxation. The word relaxation won't fit up here on this line of text without going past the margin. So Word automatically brings it down to the next line all the way out to the left margin. In Justify, you would start typing the word relaxation and then it would cut it off. It would put a dash, like you might get RELAX dash, and then ATION would show up here on the next line. You don't really want to do that unless you're told to. So most of the time, you're going to be over here in a line left. Occasionally, you're going to need to center something. But how do we double space something? Well, that is here on this little icon with the up and down blue arrows. And when I hover over it, you can see it says line and paragraph spacing. So if I click that little arrow to get my drop-down menu, I have options. I can single space it. I can make it 1.15, 1.5, or 2.0. 2.0 is double spacing. So you really want to get that set up before you even start typing your title page. If you forget though, and you have typed the whole essay and you realize it's not double spaced, you can come over here, select all, right? And then it highlights the entire document. And then you can come over here and click your 2.0, right? That's double spacing. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. All right, font. Many instructors will probably require Times, well, I won't say probably. Many instructors might require Times New Roman 12-point font. Some instructors might also allow Arial in 12-point font or Calibri in 11-point font. The true font requirements are actually more inclusive now. That 7th edition of APA format kind of says, you know what, there's actually quite a few fonts that are fine for research papers. What they recommend is a sans serif font. So basically you don't want anything that is too hard to read. That's the most important rule, is to choose a legible, reader-friendly font style and size. You don't really want to go above 12 point. You don't go below 10 point. And really, there's only a few font styles where a 10-point font size would be okay. You know, Times New Roman in a 10-point font is too small. It is not easy to read. I would say play it safe and use one of these three. Times New Roman 12-point font, Arial 12-point font, or Calibri 11-point font. Do that and you're fine, right? Whatever font you choose though, make sure that it is the font style and size that is used throughout the entire document. You do not change the font at any point during the essay, from title page all the way through the references page, right? Okay, so the next elements are page numbers and title page, right? So page numbers go in the top right corner of the header, and it's just the page number. You don't include your name or any other words with the page number. Nothing else goes in the header at this point. You probably, if you've used APA format in the past, up in your header, you probably had the page number in the right corner and the title of your paper in the left corner of the header, in all caps. It was called a running head. And student submissions no longer require the running head. The only requirement up in that header section is your page number in the right-hand corner. Just the page number. All right, so let's, I'm switching back and forth a lot here. All right, so let's take a look here, right? So this is the title of the essay. And way back in the day, and if you want to get into your header, like this is where I was, like my cursor's here in the word composition. If I want to get into my header, I come up here in this area and I double click, right? You can see header. A lot of papers that you've done in the past probably were required to have a running head over here on this side. Student submissions no longer require that. All you need is the page number here in the right corner. That's it. And the title page does get numbered as page 1, right? And then page 2. If you have an instructor who still requires you to have an abstract, your abstract will be on page 2 by itself, just the abstract on page 2. And even if it's only a paragraph, the abstract gets its own dedicated page. And then your essay would start on page 3. But again, we're doing student submission guidelines now. So page number in the right corner, title page is page 1. Your essay will begin on page 2. And then the page numbers keep going, right? And we get down to the references and the reference list. Those pages are also numbered in order, right? Okay. Just the page number, that's it. The title page, right? So when you first create the page, your cursor is going to be up on the first line of text at the left margin. You're going to center, and then you're going to click enter 3 or 4 times so that you're starting a little further down on the page. And then in bold, you're going to type the title of your paper, right? Then you're going to take it out of bold and hit enter twice. And then you're going to put your name, enter, your school's name, enter, course number and name, enter, instructor's name, enter, and assignment due date, right? Once again, it's crazy. We'll switch back. Okay, load here. All the way back at the top. Okay, right? So this is where my first line of text is, right? See where my little blinky line is, right? So I centered, and then I hit enter a few times, and then in bold, I have the title of my essay. Then I took it out of bold font, hit enter twice, and then the name, the school, the course number and course name, the instructor's name, and the due date. That's your title page. You don't need a footer, right? The footer is the part down at the bottom, just like the header is up at the top. You don't need anything down there, right? This is all you need for a student submission. Page number in the right-hand corner, page 1. Then the title in bold, centered, enter twice, and then these 5 pieces of information, not in bold, but still centered, and only no extra space in between them. It should look just like this. That's not terribly difficult. So if you're thinking that, oh my gosh, title page, I don't know what to put on a title page, I don't know what it's supposed to be, this is what it's supposed to be, and it's really not that hard. So that is one part of the APA format design elements that you should be able to relax a little bit about. You don't have to memorize it. Again, you can come back and look. Okay, what goes on the first line? Oh yeah, my title, centered and in bold. Right? How much space between the title and my name? Oh yeah, 2 spaces. And you can see it, and then you can do it according to the title of your essay and your name, right? Just follow the pattern, follow the template, follow the example. Okay. Okay. Oops. The next element of APA format are the headings and subheadings. So APA uses a 5-heading system to separate papers. There's level 1. Level 1 is centered, it is in bold, and if you have more than 1 word, you would treat it like a title where almost the first letter of every word would be capitalized. Level 2 is, so level 1 would be the title of your essay that you'll put on page 2. And then if you have any main sections, if you've broken the paper down into main sections, then the title of each section would also be a level 1 heading. Right? Level 2 is if each of your main sections also gets broken down into smaller sections. And that one, the next level, level 2, it's not centered anymore. It comes out to the left margin. It is boldface and in italics. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's level 3. Boldface, and still you have that title case heading, which means the first letter of every important word is capitalized. Level 3 is if your first subsection is also broken down into 2 or more subsections, right? It's still left aligned. It is still in boldface, but this one is also in italics to differentiate, and you still have the title case heading. I didn't even really, well, I kind of went past. So basically, you can tell by how it looks where it fits in to the essay. So my example here, we have an essay, and it's broken down into 2 main sections, method and results. So these are the main sections. They are level 1 headings. So it gets centered, it gets put in bold, and the first letter of every main word would be capitalized. In this case, each section, the title is only 1 word, right? The section on methods gets broken down into 2 subsections, site of study and participant population. Those are level 2s, right? So they come out to the left margin, they're in bold, and we use title case headings. So site and study and participant and population are all capitalized. This section on participant population, though, has 2 subsections, because part of the participant population was teachers, the other part was students, right? So to let your reader know how these 2 sections fit in, it is brought out to the left margin in bold, but this time we put it in italics to show that teachers and students go with this section on participant population, right? And then we got to the next section, results. So this is the second main section. So result gets centered and put in bold. And if it was more than 1 word, the other words would also begin with capital letters. The results section is broken down into 2 subsections, special ability and kinesthetic ability. Special ability is broken down into 2 subsections, test 1 and test 2. This subsection about test 1 is also broken down into 2 subsections, right? Teachers with experience and teachers in training. So you can kind of see how we use the placement, the boldface, and sometimes the italics to show how each subsection is connected to a bigger main section. It's almost like the organization of the essay. Now, you will always need at least 1 level 1 heading, and that will be your title. It shows up at, obviously, your title page, right? But look, it also shows up on the first line of text here on page 2. So no matter what, you will always have at least one level 1 heading. And a level 1 heading gets centered, put in bold, and every main big word, important word gets capitalized. At the very least, you'll have that. Now, will you need any of the other levels? Well, for my class, for this paper that you're writing for me, no. I am not requiring level 2, 3s, 4s, 5s. I'm not. You can if you want. For instance, if your essay is on the causes of nursing burnout. Actually, we'll go with a different one. Let's say you chose the does inadequate nurse staff put patients at risk? And let's say you've decided to focus on 3 specific risks that patients face. The first is an increased risk of falls, and then an increased risk of infection, and an increased risk of medication errors. You could have a heading for risk of fall, and then another section with this heading, level 1 heading, risk of infection, and then another level 1 heading, another section for risk of medication errors, right? You can do that if you want. But the thing is this is, I don't want this paper to be a super long paper with, really cumbersome, complicated information. You're not going to really need to break it down into main sections and subsections and sub-subsections. But having said that, just because it's not required from me doesn't mean it won't be required by other instructors, or that in another class you might write a paper that is a little more complicated, where having the headings and subheadings will help your reader understand how everything is organized and how it all fits together, right? So just know that headings and subheadings in APA format have different design qualities to them. Basically, where they're placed, whether they're centered or aligned left. And you can see all of these are in bold. Some of them are in italics as well, though, if it's, level 3 or level 5. You can come back to this PowerPoint if you ever need to use headings and subheadings, or you can, again, go to apa.org, check it out if you're required to use headings and subheadings. But for my class, you only need one level 1 heading, and it will be your title at the top, centered in bold on page 2. All right? All right. All right. References page. We are going to look at this more closely in the next lesson, but I am going to go over the basics of this design element. First of all, where is it located? It is located on the page immediately following your conclusion. So if your essay concludes on page 5, but the only thing that's on page 5 is the last 4 sentences of your concluding paragraph, just a little tiny bit right at the top, you may be tempted to start your references list right under that, but that is not how you do it. You go all the way to the next page. Your references list, your references page should always start on a new page, immediately following the last page of the essay. It is still part of the whole document, though, so it still gets page numbers in the top right corner. So if your essay ended on page 5, even though you only have a few sentences of your conclusion at the top of page 5, your references page will begin on page 6, right? How is it formatted? Because the reference, just like the title page has specifications, the references page has specifications as well. The word references gets centered at the top of the page. I don't have it on here, but it should be in bold also. The references page is still double spaced, just like the rest of the document. There are no extra spaces between entries. I think I may have forgotten to mention this in the spacing section, but there are no extra spaces anywhere in the document. And we will look back at that sample essay in a moment, and I'll show you what I mean by that. But you get to the end of an entry and you hit enter one time and start the next entry. So no extra spaces between entries, no extra spaces anywhere, right? The entries on the references page are arranged alphabetically according to the first word of each entry. So you have to have each reference entry figured out first before you know what order they're supposed to go in on the references page. And you're going to learn about that in the next lesson. Any entry that uses more than one line of text requires what we call a hanging indent. All right, we'll look at that in just a moment. What does the references page contain? It is a list of all sources that are used and referred to in the essay. So every source, and we learned this in the plagiarism lesson, every source that is used or referred to in the essay must appear on the references page. It has to. And every source that's listed on the references page must be cited at least once in the essay. So if you read an article, and maybe you planned on using it at first, but now you're not, you don't put that on the references page. The only thing that goes on the references page are the sources that you used and cited in the essay. Every source that is used and cited in the essay must appear on the references list, and every source on the references list should be cited at least once in the essay. Has to match up. The reference entries contain full source information so that your reader, if you have quoted a source in a section of your essay, your reader can think to themselves while they're reading, wow, that is really interesting. I'd love to read that article myself. They can look at your citation, they can go to your reference list, find that source, and they have every piece of information they need to find the exact source that you used. Different types of sources require different entry formatting. And again, we will learn about that in the next lesson. But the first word of each entry, once you know what the entry is supposed to be, the first word of each entry matches up with what's in the parentheses for your in-text citation. And we're going to look at that, right? It's a lot to remember about the references page. But again, you don't have to remember all of it. Just know the references page has very specific formatting rules. I don't necessarily remember all of them, so I need to refer to something that shows me to remind me. You can come back to this lesson. You can go to apa.org. You can go to Purdue Online Writing Lab. But just make sure that the end product has all of the required elements in place. All right, once again, let's pull up. Yeah, okay, that's what I'm talking about. All right, so where I said there's no extra spaces in AP format, notice how the title, right, is centered on the first line of text, and then the introductory paragraph starts on the next line of text. There's no extra space. We have our introductory paragraph. Here's our second paragraph. No extra space. even when we get to the first section on guided imagery, there is no extra space between this paragraph and the heading. There's no extra space between this heading, level 1 heading, and this level 2 heading. There's no extra space between this level 2 heading and this paragraph. There are literally no extra spaces anywhere in the document, right? We get through this essay, all right? And then, oh, here on page 9, so our conclusion began, actually it begins, they broke it down into, even the conclusion is broken down into subsections for this essay. So the conclusion starts up here at the bottom of page 7, goes all the way through page 8, and ends right here at the top of page 9. But the rest of that page stays blank. And then the references page begins on page 10. The word references is centered and in bold. The first entry starts on the next line of text. No extra space. This is our first entry. We get to the end of it. We go down to the next line and immediately start typing our second entry. No extra space anywhere. Right? So references centered and in bold. No extra spaces between entries. The entries are listed by alphabetical order according to the first word of each entry. So this author had to figure out the reference entry for every single one of these sources. Once they had the reference entry for every single source, and there's a lot of them in this one, then they knew how to list them. You do not list them in any random order you want. You do not list them in the order that they're used throughout the essay. You list them alphabetically according to the first word of each entry. Many times that first word will be an author's last name. Sometimes it might be an organization's name. Sometimes you may have a source that has no author, and then you'll be using something else to begin the entry. Doesn't matter what it is. Whatever the first word is supposed to be for that entry, that is what you use to figure out the alphabetized list. This source right here, this entry only took up 1 line of text, very short entry. This next one took up 2 lines of text. And this is what I mean by a hanging indent. The beginning of every entry should come all the way out to the left margin, and any subsequent line for an entry gets indented. All right, this one right here takes up 3 lines of text. The beginning of this entry comes all the way out to the left margin, we go all the way over, right? Second line is indented, we go all the way over. Oh, and we have part of the entry on the third line. It also comes over, right? You can see that is how we can tell where each entry begins. I know that if I go down in this section right here, this area, I know everything here is for this source. And because this word comes all the way back out to the left margin, I know that this is the start of the next source. They are not numbered, simply alphabetized according to the first word of each entry. So you need to know how to create each entry before you try to put them in the correct order. Now, when you're just finding your sources and trying to keep track of them and creating your reference entries, you don't have to try to have them in order from start to finish throughout your whole process. But by the time you are finishing up the essay, you need to make sure that on the references page, before you turn it in, that they are organized alphabetically according to the first word of each entry. All right? So, again, you may not remember every single one of these requirements. Just know, just what you do need to remember is The references page requires certain formatting, specific formatting. I need to look at something to make sure that I am including every required element. Come back to this lesson, go to the other sources that I've mentioned. Right? Okay. The other part of APA format, because remember I said it, when we talk about APA format, we're really talking about the design elements and how we treat our sources. So we just went through the 7 design elements. We're going to talk about reference entries and reference pages in more detail in the next lesson. But I do want to at least mention, give you an overview of how APA requires you to treat your sources. But there will also be a more in-depth lesson on citation. You can use source information in 3 ways. Remember, you can use a summary, you can use a paraphrase, and you can use a direct quote. And remember, no matter how you use source information, though, you must always provide a citation in that exact spot of the essay. And again, the citations are the parentheses that you see within paragraphs after an author has referred to or directly quoted one of their sources. We provide citations for 2 reasons. First, to let the reader know that that information is from a source and not your own original ideas and words. But also to let the reader know how to find that source on your references page in case they want to look at the full source themselves. All right? So citations are used to give credit to the original authors and to give your reader an easy way of finding that source on your references page. That is why making sure that the reference page is formatted correctly, that every entry begins correctly, is important, because it's that beginning entry part that goes in the parentheses. You have to make sure it's correct so that you put the correct thing in parentheses that leads the reader to that correct spot on the references list. It would make no sense if your reference entry began with the title of an article and your citation includes the author's last name. They're not going to be able to easily find Jane Smith on your references page, because Jane Smith is going to be buried in that entry somewhere if you started that entry with the title. So however the entry is, make sure you have the correct entry, and then it will match up with your citation and your reader can easily find it. What goes in the parentheses, what goes in the citation in APA format will include the first word of the source's reference page entry, a comma, in the year of publication. If the source's reference page entry begins with an author's last name, then that last name will go in the parentheses, Smith, comma, 2019. If that source doesn't have and that applies still to organizational authors, like World Health Organization. It would still begin, the entry is going to begin with World Health Organization. So that's what's going to go in your parentheses. But if there's absolutely no author whatsoever associated with the source, then it's the reference page entry will likely begin with the title of the source. So it's the title that's going to go in the parentheses. How to tie a tie, comma, 2019. Right? And there's going to be other scenarios where, you know, you're going to have to figure out if there's no author. So how does my entry begin? And then what goes in the parentheses? But again, plenty of ways to figure that out. Right? We're going to go into reference entries and citations more in the next 2 lessons. But here's what I will say, and I'm going to say it again. The best advice I can give you when it comes to your sources, working with your sources, create the reference page entries first, even if it's on a separate document, you know, it's like, okay, I'm going to use this source. Let me go ahead and create the reference entry for it. I'm going to use this source. Let me go ahead and create the reference entry for it. You don't have to worry about whether they're alphabetized or not yet, right? Just create the entry properly, which we will learn about in the next lesson, how to do that. If you have the correct reference entry for every single source you're using already there, already created, you will be able to figure out very quickly what goes in the parentheses for your citation. A lot of students do it in the opposite order. They start writing the essay and they're going through, okay, I've used a source here, how do I cite it? And it takes them forever to figure out how, because they're having to go look and okay, now I have to create a reference entry, and they lose their train of thought, they lose their flow, they try to go back to writing, and it takes them a while. Maybe now they got to put it off for another day because they took so much time trying to figure out how to do the citation that now they've used up all the time that they had available that day. The other thing that could possibly happen is you're writing the essay and you're like, oh gosh, how do I know I'm using source information here. I know I need to cite it, but how do I do that? How do I cite it? Oh, not quite sure. I don't really have time right now to worry about it. I'll come back and insert the citation later. But then you just keep writing. But of course, what happens? You forget to come back and add in the citation. Now, if you have a method for this where like you're writing, you're using source information, you're not quite sure how to cite it yet, you're going to come back and do it later, and you like make a big note or some sort of indicator in the essay, you know, so that when you're going back through, you're like, oh, yep, okay, need a citation there. But more than likely, most students aren't going to do that. They're just going to be, you know, typing, using source material, don't know how to do the citation yet. I'll come back to it later. Keep typing, keep typing, keep typing. And then they have nothing to help them remember that they need to go back and insert the citation. And then they have a plagiarized section of their essay because they've used source material without citing it. If you have the reference entries already created before you start typing the essay, you're going to know, you're going to have something that you can easily look at and know exactly what goes in the parentheses for the citation. Especially once I show you how to create reference entries and then how to use those entries to create your citations, which is what we will be doing in the next two lessons. But it is the best advice I can give you for how to save time and avoid plagiarism, accidental plagiarism. Because you're typing and you're like, okay, I'm using source material. I know I need to provide a citation. I'm not trying to copy. I'm not trying to cheat. But I just really need to keep moving forward so I can get this essay finished. I'll come back and put the citation in later. But then you don't, and it's still plagiarism, whether you meant to or not. You know? So really take this advice. Obviously, you're not really going to understand how to use my advice just yet, because we haven't looked at how to create reference entries, and we haven't looked at how to use those entries to create our citations. But I promise you, that is exactly what I'm doing in the next two lessons, to make sure that you watch both of those, right? If you have questions about these APA basics, don't hesitate to reach out, but I will suggest this. Go ahead and watch the next two lessons this week, right? Watch the reference entries lesson, watch the citations lesson, because it's possible that any questions you have right now might get answered in those lessons. Also, even if your question doesn't get answered in those two lessons, it's very possible that you'll end up with more questions after watching those two lessons. And then you can send me all of your questions at once, and I will help you out as best I can. Okay, but do not be afraid of APA format. You are not expected to memorize it. And once, all of that, those design elements, that stuff's easy to figure out. Don't tell yourself that it's hard. First of all, you can do hard things. So even if it was hard, you can still do it. But second of all, it's really not hard. You can come back to this PowerPoint or go to those other resources and just look. Okay, page number in the right-hand corner. Got it. Title page, this information. Got it. Double space. Got it. You don't have to memorize it. Just know where to go to find what you need. Right? The reference entries and citations, a little more complicated, but even those don't have to be difficult. Right? You can do this. It's really not as hard as it seems. And I hope knowing that you don't have to have any of this memorized helps. Okay? All right. That's it for this lesson. And go ahead and move on to the reference and treat lesson when you're ready.